Hey guys, welcome to the first video of a series where I read through and review each issue of Marvel Comics' Moon Knight, as well as his various team-ups. I'm going to try to get through his entire solo series as well as any comic that has the character in it, all of his mini-series and team-ups. I think that would be really fun to do. But for now, we are going to start with Moon Knight number 1 from 1980. I don't want to start with the 1975 appearances just because it was pre-solo series. There are some things in there that were retconned later. It's kind of an odd period for Moon Knight's existence, so we'll probably go over that part of things another time. So, with all that said, let's get into the books. Starting off with the cover, I have always loved this cover. It's a pretty famous image, and it demonstrates the three distinct personalities of the character pretty well. The charismatic and high-class Stephen Grant, the rough-around-the-edges cabbie Jake Lockley, and the line-writing killer Mark Spector. They even introduce Marlene in a clever way on the cover, putting her next to Stephen Grant, since he's pretty romantic, and he's also the one who primarily contributes to their relationship. We also get a good sneak peek of the art style of Bill Sienkiewicz, who's the primary artist for this run. He's certainly not a man who's afraid of color, which I greatly appreciate. We see some stark yellow highlights on Mark Spector, as well as a lot of very deep shadows and colorful outfits on all the various different characters. We also see a Moon Knight with red eyes on the cover, which is not something we see too often. It's a pretty cool look. As well as a very bold, striking, solid blue background. Solid color backgrounds is something that he's going to be doing a lot in these panels, always to very great effect. I love this art style. It is classic, it is iconic, it is appealing, and it holds up very well today. Turning the page, we see that our story starts in Sudan, south of Egypt, following a mercenary band fighting against some rebellion that is unnamed. It's certainly a location that has a lot of intrigue, starting off in Sudan before we end up in New York with all the other heroes. And as we read on, we see that this mercenary band is being led by a man named Bushman and his second in command, Mark Spector. And once again in this intro panel here, we see a lot of bold and confident use of color and line work. It's something that I'll probably stop and appreciate often because you really cannot overstate how important and impactful a good artist is on a comic book series. So I think it's really worth pointing out when something sticks out like this. And as we turn the page, we focus in on the two men we mentioned earlier, Bushman and Spector. We very quickly establish that though working together and in the same profession, that being mercenary, Mark is not very comfortable with Bushman's values. Bushman notices Mark isn't exactly happy about how they just crushed an enemy rebellion, so Bushman tells him that he needs to be ruthless in the mercenary profession and to control both his men and his enemies with fear. Mark claims he is simply a soldier and not a butcher. We're already only halfway through one page, and we already understand these men a little bit. We have a good understanding of where they draw some of their moral lines, we have a good first impression of them, and we understand that they have a conflict brewing, so we have some pretty efficient storytelling going on here. I'd also just like to praise how visually striking Bushman's character design is. He's got this wild-looking white mask of death face tattoo, he's got these sharp steel teeth, and he's covered in elaborate gold jewelry. He's got this large and imposing physique. It's a very bold and unique character design. To me, visually, he is certainly a villain that would stand out in a crowd of villains. He is a very recognizable individual, and we learn a lot about his character from the way he carries himself and from the way that he looks. He craves power, and he craves wealth, and he will obtain them through fear and slaughter. It's no wonder that this guy would go on to be Moon Knight's nemesis for years to come. Shortly after this conversation, Mark's friend, Frenchie, a fellow mercenary and professional pilot, arrives. He tells Mark that he's been snooping through Bushman's plans, and it's become clear that they are on the wrong side of this conflict. Frenchie seemingly has had his own suspicions regarding Bushman even before Mark did, and has determined that Bushman is a bad dude. Mark, after his last conversation with Bushman, agrees. Then Bushman comes up to them and says that their band will target a civilian village tonight, as an Egyptian tomb has been discovered by an archaeologist, and he wants the treasure they will likely have found. Here we establish once again that Mark values life in a way that Bushman does not. Mark doesn't want to risk the lives of his men nor the villagers just for some treasure. But Bushman wants gold, and insinuates he wishes to conquer Sudan. Once Bushman walks away, Mark and Frenchie commit to leaving Bushman that night. Now the raid on the village starts. The town has a small militia, but they are easily defeated by Bushman and his men. Now we are introduced to a couple of new characters, Marlene Allron and her father, Peter Allron, the archaeologist who made this discovery that Bushman is seeking. Peter knows about Bushman as well and guesses why he is here. He decides to try to take Bushman out himself, as he doesn't want all of his historical artifacts to be lost, as he guesses they would be melted down for gold. Taking a moment to appreciate the art style once again, we have several of these solid color backgrounds of varying color that I had mentioned before. I also really like this opening panel that shows the invasion of the village by Bushman and his men. This explosion with the purple sky, the man in the green clothing, it's all very striking, it's very colorful. I like this panel a lot. We also have some very creative uses of light and shadow. The artist is really showing off his chops here, showing some very unique presentations of color, some very unique angles. Even when these artists were so pressed for time back in those days and had such limited printing ability, they really came up with something that's pretty admirable here. Alright, back to the story. Turning the page, we see Bushman orders all the civilians in this village to be lined up in the town square, and Peter is sneaking up behind him with a large golden dagger, the one we saw him pick up before. As Peter is going in for the kill, Mark alerts Bushman and swipes the dagger out of Peter's hand out of instinct. Mark offers to line him up with the other villagers, but Bushman refuses, saying Mark has a lot to learn about terror. Here we get a good display of how far Bushman is willing to go to rule by terror, as Mark stares darkly at Bushman using his steel teeth to rip Peter's throat out, killing him. Very brutal. As Mark kneels down by the dying man in horror, Peter manages to choke out some words. He wants Mark to save his daughter. Mark takes off to find her, while Bushman is distracted by the gold dagger that Peter dropped, noting that this is evidence that the tomb he heard about is real. Mark finds Marlene and tells her that Peter, her dad, is dead, and that she needs to escape the village. Marlene is angry and accuses Mark of killing him, and Mark accepts the accusation as he feels guilty for stopping Peter from killing Bushman, making him indirectly responsible for Peter's death. It's another interesting moment for Mark's character. He takes responsibility for the evil actions of those around him, feeling it falls on him to stop them, and if he doesn't, it's his fault what happens. He feels that he may as well have been the one to commit the crime if it happens on his watch. He also isn't very concerned with maintaining his own image or reputation when putting this crime on himself. You can really see how someone like this would be the sort of person to become a vigilante later down the line. But Mark uses this moment to scare Marlene out of the village in order to save her life. Marlene tries to make sense of Mark saving her life by accusing him of just trying to ease his conscience, and she takes off in her jeep. Then in comes Bushman. He's telling Mark that he is getting too soft, but he'll look past this since Mark did save his life. Frenchie arrives on the scene, and Mark informs him that they need to go pick up a girl in the desert. However, things start to go badly here, because right as they turn to walk towards the helicopter, they hear Bushman order the civilians that they lined up earlier to be executed via firing squad. Mark hears the order and turns towards them in an attempt to stop the massacre, but he is too late. At this point, Mark loses his temper and begins to level insults at Bushman, and then Mark attacks him. However, Mark's blind rage causes him to quickly lose the fight, and Bushman defeats him easily. He knocks him out and instructs his men to leave Mark out in the desert to die. Frenchie just acts natural. We then see Mark wake up in the middle of a barren desert, where he wanders all day and all night. We see some more beautiful use of color in the artwork here, seeing this desert sunrise as well as a nighttime scene of Mark taking cover from a sandstorm. Eventually, he finds some men who pick him up and take him into the hidden temple of Khonshu, the place that we can assume Marlene and Peter found earlier on. On the floor of the temple, one of the men declares that Mark is dead. His heart has stopped. Marlene is there and says, "It's good. He deserves to die since he killed her father." As the men leave to pack up their camp, Marlene begins to reflect on her own thoughts. This is a great moment for Marlene and gives us a good insight into her character. She is concerned with how she can be so happy about a person dying. She's worried that she is becoming as bloodthirsty as the mercenaries she claims to hate. She values human life and believes that there's some good in someone even like Mark. So she starts to identify the good qualities in Mark and mourn the waste of a life. This is a pretty consistent trait, an optimism to humanity that we'll see come back again with Marlene. We'll even see it come back again in this very comic issue. Suddenly, Mark springs back to life, the narrator speculating if it was natural or something supernatural that caused this. Marlene exclaims that he was dead, and Mark says he's no more dead than Khonshu, pointing to the Khonshu statue in the temple. He suddenly and mysteriously seems to know a whole lot about Khonshu. He takes the white priest cloak from Khonshu's statue and puts it on, claiming his title as Moon Knight. Mark then takes Marlene's jeep and starts to drive back to the village. Marlene chases after. We cut to Bushman, who is still terrorizing villagers, making the wives of the dead men dance for him. Moon Knight arrives and begins to quite fatally eliminate Bushman's men. So we've established how far Moon Knight is willing to go in a fight. He works his way through all the men until nobody is left but Bushman. They confront each other, and Mark claims he's learned Bushman's lesson and has become a figure of fear. I gotta say, I love this transitional costume, half Moon Knight garb and half mercenary garb. It's a fun one-time thing we get to see here. Unfortunately, the confrontation is cut short because Marlene has finally caught up with Mark. Frenchie thought she might be an enemy, so he snuck up on her and restrained her. Not knowing who Frenchie is, she yelled, "Let me go," which grabbed Mark's attention. Bushman took the opportunity to disappear into the night. Mark wants to go after him, but Frenchie says that he has done enough, that Bushman is finished as a terrorist power without his men. And then he says it's time to leave. First, though, Mark and Marlene introduce themselves to each other officially. Then the physical toll of everything he has been through catches up with Mark, and he collapses. The origin story of Moon Knight is now effectively over, and for the latter half of the comic they move into the future a bit for a brief confrontation with Bushman a second time. So for now, let's pause for a little review. The story is very efficient and very densely packed with a lot of good information, character development, and plot advancement. It may not feel like it after how much we've talked about this, but the actual amount of comic book being reviewed has only been 14 pages, including the cover. It's pretty impressive how much story they fit in there, and I love the classic art style. The colors especially are used to great effect in both portraying atmosphere, but also with the characters making each person look distinct and stylish. The costume design for the hero and villain are especially good. As I said, Bushman is particularly striking. They quickly establish the personalities, morals, and values of each of these characters, showing them affecting their actions and dialogue. So far, so good. Alright, moving on. The comic then does a time skip to present day, and we are introduced to Mark's other two identities. The charismatic and suave investor who brings funding for Moon Knight's mission, Stephen Grant, and the rough, down-to-earth cab driver with his ear to the streets, Jake Lockley. Finally, he still maintains his true original identity, the bloodthirsty, mercenary Mark Spector. Together, they are Moon Knight. At this point, these identities aren't quite a fully fledged personality disorder. That'll be a little bit later down the line, but these characters are pretty definitively who they will remain to this day. We're shown a scene inside of a mansion where Stephen, is shown to be narrating the tale we were just told. He's dictating his personal history into a tape recorder. Marlene walks in inquiring who is talking. She looks like she's living at this mansion, so we can infer that she and Mark are in a relationship of some kind by now. Stephen says that he felt he should get this stuff down on record because Moon Knight fought some heroin dealers bearing the skull amulet Bushman's people used to wear back in Sudan. Bushman is in New York, and he's after Mark. Steven declares that he's going to use Jake to find Bushman, and here we demonstrate how Mark puts his alternate personalities to use. Jake, the cab driver, investigates problems at the street level of the city, and as he shifts into the Jake persona, he tells Marlene to stay behind and out of danger, even if she feels like doing something because Bushman killed her father. We move to Frenchie showing off his engineering and piloting skills, creating this crazy-looking, deathly silent mooncopter, and he jokes that the Defense Department would be wildly jealous of it. Way to go, Frenchie. As they leave in the mooncopter, Marlene reflects on the last time someone told her to stay behind while they try to stop Bushman. It was her father, who died shortly after. We move back to Mark using his Jake Lockley personality and entering Gina's diner, a location that will become quite frequent in Moon Knight comics. He greets Gina and asks how her kids are doing. She says they are good and finally passing Black History, which I did not know was a class in 1980. And Jake says that's great, but he's actually here to talk to Crowley. Crowley is an old homeless man who dresses in suits and hats and speaks like a Shakespearean character, and he gives Jake street gossip in exchange for pancakes. I love this man. He is so packed to the brim with personality and flavor. Crowley is by far my favorite side character in Moon Knight stories, at least for the series where the original side cast is present. Here, though, he only makes a brief appearance. He recognizes the amulet as Bushman's and tells Jake where it's said Bushman is living, saying he operates out in the open as if wanting to be found. We cut over to Jake changing into the Moon Knight costume, which just looks so good in its debut within Moon Knight's first solo comic. He tells Frenchie the location that Crowley describes, and off they go, but not alone, as they are being ominously followed. Moon Knight then walks into a club demanding to know where the back door is and telling someone inside to tell Bushman he's here to spring the trap. Some guards approach to stop Moon Knight but are quickly disarmed and defeated while onlookers whisper about rumors of this Moon Knight, surprised that he's real. Moon Knight locates Bushman's office, ready for a trap, but finds nothing inside except the gold dagger from back in Egypt on top of the desk. Then Bushman emerges from the shadows with a gun, looking as terrifying as ever. Then we cut back to the mysterious car that was following, and it was Marlene who had decided to go help Moon Knight confront Bushman after all. She walks in on Bushman instructing Moon Knight to move into a corner, and Moon Knight intimidating Bushman. Marlene makes a sound. It distracts Moon Knight for a moment, and Bushman once again uses the opportunity, but this time to fire his pistol. Moon Knight dodges it. Enraged, Bushman shoots Marlene as she tries to run away instead. Moon Knight loses it and tries to retaliate, but his rage makes him careless once again, and Bushman knocks him to the ground. Bushman uses Bite, but it is not effective, which means that Moon Knight truly is a fighting type. Good old Moon Knight gets the upper hand and begins to relentlessly pummel Bushman, despite the fact that he is already knocked out. Marlene insists that Bushman is defeated and stops Moon Knight from killing him. Moon Knight doesn't understand why Marlene would stop him of all people, since Bushman killed her father. Marlene says that it was her father, not his. She shows her qualities once again, saying that she used to think Mark was the same as Bushman, and she was wrong. Once again, she chooses to see the value in human life when her enemy is in front of her, and sees the good Bushman has done by playing a hand in Moon Knight's creation. She insists that this creation be better than Bushman by not being merciless and murderous, not letting Bushman spoil the one good thing he has started. Then we see Bushman get found by the police, among some quotes saying, "Behind that legend is a man, a good and powerful man, and no matter how many roles you play, false or true, you must never abuse your power." That line sets the tone for Moon Knight's struggles for decades to come. Most of these stories are about Moon Knight taking things too far and suffering consequences for his actions. It is a remarkable premise with a lot of foresight. I actually really enjoy contrasting this with the mission statement of Spider-Man, that being, with great power comes great responsibility. In a lot of ways, that is also Moon Knight's mission statement, but kind of coming at it from the other direction. Spider-Man has to be responsible by taking action, whereas Moon Knight needs to be responsible by taking less action and restraining himself in order to not abuse the power he's been given. It's a very good little line in there, and it's also very cool to see how they pretty much nailed the premise for Moon Knight's story going forward right here at the end of the first comic book. And that concludes issue number 1 of Moon Knight, so let's talk about it a bit. This first issue communicates a lot in a short amount of time. It is quite impressive, but it also leads to the one thing I feel could be better with this book. That being this last confrontation. It seems quite rushed. We see Mark Spector's new home and set up in New York very quickly, and then are walked through this lightning-fast investigation that'd usually take up a whole issue, where Jake Lockley is outright told where to find Bushman. He goes, we have our showdown. I think it would have been better, in my opinion, to stay in Egypt for more time. Spend some time with Mark recovering from his near-death experience, getting to know Marlene a little better, and then we can have a final showdown with Bushman and also do this scene with Marlene in Egypt. That way we wouldn't have to go through this rushed investigation to have a second confrontation. That would have really freed up some time to show some things I would have really liked to see, like Mark's military career, which has been established to be canon at this point in some prior comics. It would have also been nice to see a little bit of his life as a mercenary before this started. That would help develop his friendship with Frenchie a little more strongly. And it also would have been nice to see a little bit of him beginning his operations in New York instead of just kind of cutting to them already being in place with his connections to the side characters already being made. That is material that gets covered later on by future authors, but I think it would have been nice to get some of that back here in the beginning too. That being said, I definitely have far more praise than critique for this issue. The art is iconic, the characters are very tangible and very good, their visual designs are strong, the storytelling is compelling and efficient, and altogether this is just a great and very unique origin story for a superhero. Maybe someday it will get a live-action adaptation. Alright, that concludes this issue's review. If you liked it, let me know. I'll make some more. Like I said, I would ultimately like to do every Moon Knight comic. I think that would be pretty cool. So if you'd like to follow this project, go ahead and turn on notifications and look forward to Moon Knight Volume 1, Issue 2. And as you notice, due to copyright infringement laws, I cannot show you this comic word for word, so if you would like to see the whole story, I would encourage you to go to your local comic book store and support them. You can access this issue in particular pretty easily by reading the Epic Collection, Volume 1 with Moon Knight, or with the Moon Knight Omnibus, Part 1 for Doug Moench's run. Alright, that's it.